Elon Musk's AI was asked who is Jesus. What it said shocked Christians and atheists. A few weeks ago, a clip started spreading across social media claiming that Elon Musk's AI, Grok, had been asked a simple two-word question, who is Jesus, and had given an answer nobody expected. Not a dodge, not a disclaimer, not the usual I'm an AI, I can't verify supernatural claims response you'd get from most chatbots. According to the people sharing these screenshots, Grok treated the question like a court case, weighing manuscripts, historians, and probabilities, and landed somewhere that left both devout Christians and hardened atheists uncomfortable. Within days, the clip had millions of views, thousands of arguments in the comments, and pastors and skeptics alike weighing in. So what's actually going on here? Is this real? Is it exaggerated? And more importantly, what does the actual historical evidence about Jesus say? The evidence any AI or any historian or any curious person would have to work with if they try to answer that question honestly. That's what we're digging into today. Before we go further, it's worth being upfront about something. Viral AI screenshots spread fast, and they aren't always exactly what they claim to be. Different versions of this story have circulated with different quotes and different suspiciously specific numbers attached. One version claims odds of 1 in 20 billion. Another claims 1 in 100 quadrillion for prophecy fulfillment. XAI hasn't published or confirmed a specific transcript matching these claims, and screenshots of chatbot conversations are notoriously easy to edit or cherry-pick. So rather than treating a viral post as gospel, pun intended, let's do what any of these AI systems would actually have to do if you ask them this question seriously. Look at the real historical record, the sources historians actually use, and let that speak for itself. Because honestly, the real evidence is interesting enough without needing to invent statistics. Start with the most basic question. Did a man named Jesus of Nazareth actually exist? This is not really a live debate among historians, whatever your personal beliefs about who he was. Outside the New Testament, we have several independent references. The Jewish historian Josephus, writing for Roman audiences around 93 AD, mentions Jesus twice in his Antiquities of the Jews, referring to him as a teacher and noting his execution under Pontius Pilate. The Roman historian Tacitus, writing around 116 AD in his Annals, describes Christians as followers of a man called Christus who was executed by Pontius Pilate during the reign of Tiberius. Pliny the Younger, a Roman governor, wrote to Emperor Trajan around 112 AD, describing Christians gathering to sing hymns to Christ as to a god. None of these men were Christians. None of them had any reason to invent a Jewish preacher out of thin air just to make Christianity's story more convincing. That's exactly why historians treat these mentions as significant. Hostile or neutral witnesses corroborating a story are worth far more than friendly ones. So when people ask, did Jesus exist, the honest answer, agreed on by the overwhelming majority of historians regardless of their personal faith, is yes. The real debate isn't existence, it's identity. Who was he? And are the extraordinary things claimed about him true? That's where things get more complicated and where any honest analysis, human or artificial, has to slow down. The New Testament documents themselves are, by ancient standards, remarkably well preserved. Paul's letters, the earliest Christian writings we have, date to within roughly 20 to 25 years of Jesus' death. The four Gospels were written somewhere between 40 and 70 years after the crucifixion, meaning they were composed while people who had lived through the events, or who had known people who had, were potentially still alive to dispute them if the stories were being invented wholesale. Compare that to other ancient texts we take historical information from without much fuss. The earliest complete manuscripts of Homer's Iliad date from over 400 years after it was composed. We have fewer than 1,000 manuscript copies of most classical Greek and Roman texts, some far fewer. The New Testament, by contrast, exists in over 5,000 Greek manuscripts alone, with fragments dating to within decades of the originals. None of this proves the supernatural claims inside those documents. But it does mean that historians analyzing the New Testament aren't working with flimsy, late, or poorly attested material. They're working with some of the best preserved documents from the ancient world, whatever you conclude about their content. Now here's where the analysis genuinely gets interesting, and where you can see why a system built to follow the evidence might end up somewhere unexpected. Historians who study this period, including plenty who are not religious, generally agree on a small set of minimal facts about the end of Jesus' life. That he was crucified under Pontius Pilate, that his followers believed they encountered him alive afterward, that this belief transformed a group of frightened, scattered followers into people willing to proclaim it publicly, and that the movement spread rapidly in the exact region where the events supposedly happened, meaning among people in the best position to check the story and shut it down if it were false. What historians disagree on is the explanation for those facts. Did the disciples lie? Did they hallucinate? Did someone steal the body? But did something happen that we don't have a tidy modern explanation for? Each of those explanations has real defenders and real critics, and reasonable, intelligent people land in different places. What almost nobody disputes is that the pattern itself, a movement built on eyewitness claims, spreading fastest in the very place where those claims could most easily be checked and disproven, is historically unusual and worth taking seriously rather than dismissing with a shrug. This is likely why any large language model trained on the full range of historical scholarship and instructed to reason carefully rather than give a scripted non-answer ends up producing something that doesn't sound like the usual hedge. It's not that the AI has faith or doesn't have faith. It's that the underlying historical data genuinely doesn't allow for a lazy answer in either direction. Jesus never existed isn't a serious historical position. The New Testament is worthless as a historical source isn't a serious historical position either, once you actually look at how it compares to other ancient documents historians rely on constantly. But therefore the resurrection definitely happened exactly as described isn't something a probability calculation can hand you either. That's a claim about a genuinely unique, unrepeatable event, and assigning it a clean numerical probability, the way some of these viral posts claim an AI did, stretches statistical reasoning past what it can actually support. A good answer to who is Jesus sits in the uncomfortable middle. The historical evidence for his existence and the core narrative around his death is stronger than people often assume, and the ultimate question of what it all means is a philosophical and personal one that raw data can gesture toward but can't fully settle. That tension is actually what makes this such a fascinating moment for AI more broadly. For years, when people asked chatbots about religion, they got trained in caution, long disclaimers, careful balance, a refusal to ever sound like it was leaning one way. That approach was designed to avoid controversy, and it mostly worked, but it also left a lot of people feeling like they weren't getting a real engagement with the question, just a corporate shrug dressed up as neutrality. What's changed is that some newer AI systems are being built or prompted to reason more openly and show their work rather than retreat into blandness the moment a topic gets sensitive. Whether or not the specific viral screenshots going around are word-for-word accurate, the underlying phenomenon they're pointing at is real. When you actually feed a reasoning system the historical record on Jesus and ask it to think out loud, you don't get flat denial and you don't get devotional certainty. You get something that sounds a lot like a careful historian weighing genuinely difficult evidence and refusing to pretend it's simpler than it is. That's also exactly why this topic exploded online the way it did. For a certain kind of skeptic, the assumption going in is that a machine running on pure data with no emotional stake in the outcome would obviously conclude that religious claims are just ancient mythology dressed up in nicer language. When the actual historical picture turns out to be messier and more interesting than that. When it turns out serious historians who are themselves atheists still treat the crucifixion and the disciples' transformation as real historical puzzles worth explaining. That's genuinely surprising to people who hadn't looked closely before. And for a certain kind of believer, seeing a cold, unsentimental analysis land anywhere near there's a real historical case here feels like vindication, even though a careful analysis is not the same thing as proof and was never going to be. It's worth sitting with why that distinction matters, because it's where a lot of the online arguments go wrong in both directions. Historical and probabilistic reasoning can tell you that a claim is plausible, that it's better supported than people assume, that alternative explanations have real weaknesses. It cannot, on its own, deliver the kind of certainty that either full religious faith or full atheistic dismissal claims to have. A Christian philosopher looking at this might point out that Christianity has never asked people to believe blindly against the evidence. The Apostle Paul himself argued that if the resurrection didn't actually happen, the entire faith was worthless, which is itself an invitation to investigate rather than an instruction to avoid the question. A skeptical philosopher, meanwhile, might respond that historical plausibility for the general shape of events, a real execution, real grief, a real transformation in the followers, doesn't require accepting the most extraordinary explanation for that transformation over more mundane ones like grief-driven visions or a determined cover-up. Both of those are serious positions, held by serious people, and no viral screenshot from a chatbot resolves that debate, because it isn't the kind of debate that gets resolved by a paragraph of text, however well-reasoned. What this moment really reveals isn't that artificial intelligence has solved the question of who Jesus was. It's that AI is starting to become a new kind of participant in conversations humanity has been having for 2,000 years, and that participation is forcing people to notice how much of their existing certainty, on either side, was resting on not having looked closely at the historical record in the first place. People who assumed the historical case for Jesus' existence and crucifixion was thin are discovering it's stronger than they thought. People who assumed the resurrection was an open-end shut case, provable the way a math problem is provable, are discovering that even sympathetic historical analysis stops short of that. Somewhere in between those two corrected assumptions is a more honest, more interesting place to actually have this conversation. So where does that leave the viral clip that kicked all this off? Treat it the way you'd treat any dramatic screenshot on the internet. Interesting as a prompt for discussion, not as a verified transcript, and definitely not as the final word on a question people have spent 2 millennia debating. What's real and checkable is the historical record, the Roman and Jewish sources confirming Jesus existed, the unusually early and abundant manuscript evidence for the New Testament, the well-documented transformation of a small, frightened group of followers into a movement that spread across an empire willing to kill them for it. What's not settled, and probably never will be settled by evidence alone, is the meaning of that record, whether it points to something beyond history or whether it's simply one of the most consequential stories human beings have ever told about themselves. That question doesn't belong to Grok or to any AI. It belongs to you and to the 2,000 years of people before you who've had to sit with it honestly, one way or another. Whichever conclusion you land on, it's worth getting there by actually looking at the evidence, not by trusting a screenshot, and not by trusting this video either. Look it up. Read the sources. Decide for yourself.